Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. This is the chilling true story of 16-year-old Kendrick Morris, a man jailed for the barbaric act on an innocent young girl in Florida, as reported by the press.
April 24th, 2008, 10:15 p.m. Bloomingdale Regional Public Library, Valrico, Florida. The phone line crackled with static as 18-year-old Queena Phu chatted with a friend while walking toward the library's book return. It was 2 days after her birthday. She had her whole life mapped out. Graduation in just weeks, the University of Florida in the fall, dreams of a bright future stretching endlessly ahead. "There's this weird guy here," she whispered into her phone, her voice carrying an edge of unease. Then came the screams, piercing, desperate, terrifying. The line went dead. Her friend frantically tried calling back. No answer, just silence that would stretch on for years to come. What happened next in those dark minutes behind the Bloomingdale Library would shatter 2 lives forever. One through unspeakable violence, the other through the choices that led to a lifetime behind bars. But no one knew what would happen next. Before we continue, I just want to say, real stories like this take time to research, verify, and tell responsibly. Do me a quick favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep uncovering the truth together. Your support truly makes a difference. Let's step back and understand the lives that collided that April night. Queena Phu was the embodiment of the American dream realized. Brilliant, driven, always at the top of her class, she lived with her loving family in Hillsborough County. Her friends described her as lively and kind-hearted, a young woman who radiated promise. At 18, she was on the cusp of everything she'd worked for: high school graduation, college acceptance, and a future limited only by her ambitions. That evening, she was simply returning library books, a mundane task that millions of students do without a second thought. Her car sat in the parking lot, door open, as she walked those few steps to the book return. She had no idea she was being watched. Meanwhile, lurking in the shadows was Kendrick Morris, already carrying the weight of a disturbing history. Born in Valrico, Morris had endured years of documented abuse at the hands of his stepfather, former Tampa Bay Buccaneer Steve White, and a mother who failed to protect him. Court testimony would later reveal horrific punishments: Christmas presents destroyed in front of him for poor grades, physical beatings that left scars, sexual abuse by multiple perpetrators. But here's what makes this case so chilling. Morris wasn't just a troubled teen acting impulsively. 10 months earlier, at just 15 years old, he had already committed his first violent sexual assault, breaking into a daycare center and attacking a 62-year-old woman at knife point. He was already a predator, and Queena was about to become his next victim. What drove a teenager to such calculated violence, and could anything have prevented what happened next? The surveillance cameras tell part of the story. At 10:15 p.m., Kendrick Morris spotted Queena alone by the library's book return. What happened next was not a crime of opportunity, but a calculated act of predatory violence. Morris ambushed the unsuspecting teenager, overpowering her despite her valiant struggle. He dragged her behind the library building, where he subjected her to an assault so brutal that it defies comprehension. When search parties found her hours later, the scene was devastating. Queena's car sat with its door open, blood pooling on the ground beside it. Her cell phone lay abandoned where she dropped it. Behind the building, they found Queena herself, unconscious, blind, paralyzed, barely clinging to life. The attack had been so vicious that it caused catastrophic brain damage. The promising young woman who had walked to that book return would never walk, see, speak, or eat on her own again. But she was alive, and that single fact would become both a blessing and a burden that would define the rest of her family's existence. Meanwhile, Morris calmly drove to a nearby Walmart where surveillance cameras captured him shopping just 7 minutes after the attack, a detail that would become crucial during his trial. How does someone commit such brutality and then casually go shopping? The psychological implications would haunt everyone involved in this case.
For investigators, the case initially seemed impossibly difficult. No witnesses, a victim who couldn't speak, a crime scene that offered few clues. But science would succeed where conventional detective work struggled. DNA evidence extracted from Queena's body told a story that Morris couldn't deny. But here's the twist that broke the case wide open. That DNA sample matched another sexual assault case from 10 months earlier, the daycare attack Morris had committed when he was just 15. Suddenly, investigators weren't looking at a one-time offender, but a serial rape who had been escalating his violence over nearly a year. The evidence was overwhelming. The statistical probability that the DNA belonged to someone other than Kendrick Morris? 1 in 320 quadrillion. When Morris was arrested, he was still just 17 years old, but his crimes carried the weight of someone much older and more calculating. How does the justice system handle a teenager who commits adult-level violence? This question would define everything that followed. The trial began nearly 3 years after the attack in 2011. Morris, now 19, sat emotionless in the courtroom as prosecutors laid out their devastating case. The evidence was ironclad. Morris's DNA on Queena's body, her blood on his clothing, surveillance footage placing him at the scene and then casually shopping afterward. The prosecution's case was so strong that it took the jury just 50 minutes to return guilty verdicts on all counts. But the defense strategy revealed something even more disturbing. Morris's attorneys didn't really deny he committed the crimes. Instead, they focused on timing, arguing that surveillance footage showed he couldn't have been in 2 places at once. Their argument fell apart when Walmart employees testified that power surges regularly caused the store's timestamp system to reset, jumping forward by an hour and 12 minutes. Morris was convicted on 2 counts of sexual assault, kidnapping, and aggravated battery. Judge Chet Tharp, clearly moved by the brutality of the crimes, sentenced him to 65 years in prison. At the time, the judge made a statement that would prove prophetic. If ever there was a case that cried out for a life sentence, this is the case. But the legal system had more twists in store for everyone involved. While Morris began serving his sentence, Queena and her family faced their own form of life imprisonment. The vibrant teenager who once dreamed of college was gone, replaced by someone who required round-the-clock care. Every morning brought the same routine: brushing her teeth and hair, washing her face, changing her diaper, feeding her through a tube, lifting her into a wheelchair. The daily schedule was relentless. Multiple medical appointments, physical therapy, speech therapy, vision therapy, occupational therapy, aquatherapy. Treatments included hyperbaric oxygen, stem cell therapy, and neurobiofeedback. Holistic approaches, yoga, massage, chiropractic care, acupuncture, essential oils. The cost? Over $80,000 per year, out of pocket. Queena's mother, Vanna Nguyen, became a full-time caregiver, her life now revolving entirely around her daughter's needs. Her sister Anna Donato became an advocate,
speaking at court hearings and organizing fundraisers. The family created joinqueena.com to share their story and accept donations from a community that rallied around them. They organized annual 5K runs, golf tournaments, and other events to help cover the astronomical costs of Queena's care. But perhaps most remarkably, Queena herself began showing signs of the fighter she'd always been. Videos on the family's Facebook page showed small victories, wiggling her legs, taking 7 steps in a row with assistance, smiling and laughing despite everything she'd endured. Her family had been told to expect her to remain in a vegetative state. Instead, she defied expectations while inspiring thousands of people who followed her journey. 6 years into Morris's sentence, the legal landscape shifted dramatically. A series of U.S. and Florida Supreme Court decisions declared that lengthy sentences for juvenile offenders in non-homicide cases were unconstitutional. Suddenly, Morris had grounds to request a new sentencing hearing. In 2017, now 25 years old, Morris appeared before the same judge who had sentenced him 6 years earlier. The defense brought in psychologists who painted a picture of a young man transformed by prison, showing remorse and potential for rehabilitation. Dr. Bernie Wilkinson testified about Morris's abusive childhood, detailing the physical and emotional trauma that had shaped him. Morris had achieved above-average IQ scores, earned his high school diploma in prison, and become a voracious reader who used literature to examine his own behavior. The psychologists argued that Morris could be successfully rehabilitated and pose no threat to society, but Queena's family wasn't buying it. 9 family members and friends spoke for Queena, who couldn't speak for herself. Her mother, Vanna Nguyen, made a tearful plea. "I have come to accept our situation, but I will never accept letting this person go free, ever. If my daughter cannot get a resentencing, he shouldn't." Her sister Anna Donato asked Morris directly, "How many steps have you taken since 2008? How many meals have you consumed? How many books have you read?" For my sister, the answer would be none. The hearing would force everyone to confront difficult questions about justice, rehabilitation, and whether some crimes are simply unforgivable. Judge Chet Tharp found himself in an unprecedented position. The same judge who had wanted to give Morris life in prison in 2011, but was legally prevented from doing so, now had the authority to do exactly that. The judge listened to testimony about Morris's troubled childhood, his apparent rehabilitation, and his potential for redemption. He also heard the devastating impact statements from Queena's family, who reminded him that their daughter was serving her own life sentence. When it came time for his decision, Judge Tharp was unequivocal. "The court finds that the nature of the defendant's crimes in these 2 cases was especially heinous and brutal," he declared. "The court finds the defendant's crimes were sexually violent in nature. These crimes were particularly atrocious and cruel." Morris stood without expression as the judge delivered his new sentence: life in prison. But there was a twist. Under the new sentencing laws, Morris would be eligible for a review hearing in 2031, nearly 20 years later. The courtroom was filled with Queena's supporters, but her sister Anna captured the complexity of the moment. "I want to say that it's a victory, but it seems wrong to say that. I believe justice was served, but in the end, both lives are now sentenced to life. Sometimes justice feels less like victory and more like the least terrible outcome in a situation where no one truly wins." Today, more than 15 years after that fateful night at the Bloomingdale Library, the ripple effects continue. Kendrick Morris, now in his early 30s, sits in Florida's Wakulla Correctional Institution. He has a potential review hearing in 2031, when he'll be nearly 40 years old. Whether he'll ever see freedom remains an open question. Queena Phu continues her daily battle. Her mother published a memoir, The Life She Once Knew, documenting their journey. The family formed a nonprofit organization, Hope Heals the Brain, Inc., to continue supporting Queena's care and raise awareness about the long-term costs of violent crime. Donations have slowed over the years, but the needs haven't. Yet Queena's story has become one of resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. Her family describes moments of joy amid the struggle, her laughter, her small movements, her ability to inspire others despite her limitations. What started as a story about violence has become something more complex, a meditation on survival, family love, and the true meaning of justice.
The case of Queena Phu and Kendrick Morris forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our justice system and our society. Can someone who commits such brutal violence as a teenager truly be rehabilitated? Morris's psychologists insist he can be. Queena's family remains unconvinced. How do we balance the goal of rehabilitation with the need for public safety? Morris will get another chance to argue for freedom in 2031. Queena will never get her life back. What responsibility does society bear for the cycles of abuse that create violent offenders? Morris's childhood was marked by documented trauma, but thousands of abused children never become violent criminals. And perhaps most difficult of all, in a case where one person's choices destroyed two lives, what does justice actually look like? These questions don't have easy answers, but they're questions we must keep asking, because cases like this one remind us that behind every crime statistic are real people, victims, families, and communities whose lives are forever changed by moments of violence. Queena Phu survived that night in 2008, but survival and recovery are two very different things. Her story continues, one day at a time, one small victory at a time, in a life that bears no resemblance to the one she was building when she walked to that library book return. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all, that the true cost of violence extends far beyond the courtroom, far beyond the prison sentence, and far beyond the headlines that eventually fade away. What do you think? Did justice prevail in this case, or does Kendrick Morris deserve another chance at freedom when his review comes up in 2031? This case highlights the complex intersection of juvenile justice, trauma, and the lasting impact of violent crime. How do we balance rehabilitation with public safety? How do we support survivors like Queena and families who face lifelong consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if the story moved you, consider supporting organizations that help violent crime survivors and their families. Hit that like button if you want to see more deep dives into complex true crime cases that go beyond the headlines to explore the lasting human impact of violence and the difficult questions about justice that we all must face. Subscribe and ring that notification bell. Next week, we'll be exploring another case that challenges everything you think you know about crime and punishment. Until then, remember, behind every case are real people whose lives have been forever changed. Their stories matter, and they deserve to be told with the complexity and respect they demand.